We are getting very honest about what the future may hold for Ryan Lindgren. Will the Rangers D-man be extended? Could he possibly even be traded before the deadline this season? We discuss on today's episode.
You're Locked on the New York Rangers, your daily podcast on the New York Rangers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back, Blue Shirts fans, to episode number 1176 of the Locked On New York Rangers podcast. I'm your host, John Chick. So I want to thank you guys, as always, for making Locked On New York Rangers your first listen every day. We are free and available on all platforms, including YouTube. And today's episode of Locked On New York Rangers is brought to you by FanDuel. You can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet, and you will get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. And we are, of course, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So we got a very special Ryan Lindgren-centric episode here today. Basically, when it comes right down to it, as far as what the future holds for the Ranger defenseman, the team basically has three options. They can either extend him. They can do that anytime between now and really the end of the season. They can, and obviously any extension, Ryan Lindgren would no doubt have to agree to the terms, but I think we all understand that. They can trade him. That one's pretty much self-explanatory. It would have to happen before the trade deadline this season. Or they can simply keep him for the rest of this year, which is the final year of Ryan Lindgren's contract, and then let him walk. And basically, three options. We're going to take a look at all three here today. We're going to start with the extend Ryan Lindgren option. Now, what I'm going to do for all three of these is basically kind of just talk you guys through it, look at the pros and cons, add my thoughts along the way, and come to a final verdict at the end of today's show. But as far as the idea of extending Ryan Lindgren, I have to say this, even as a big-time fan of Lindgren and somebody that really appreciates the brand of hockey that he plays and what he's done to contribute to the Rangers, obviously being a winning team over the last three seasons here. This one feels like the least likely outcome that they would give Ryan Lindgren a contract extension. And if I'm being completely honest, it's probably the one that if I look at this objectively as possible, that I favor the least. I'm not saying it can't possibly happen. I'm not going to say that, Ryan Lindgren is as good as gone, but I think the writing is starting to be on the wall a little bit. And it does kind of feel like, at best, Ryan Lindgren will play out the rest of this season as a member of the Rangers and then probably be playing elsewhere as soon as next season. But nevertheless, we'll go ahead and look at this possibility from every angle. And I'll kind of add my thoughts along the way here. So I would say the most compelling reason for the Rangers to do a contract extension with Ryan Lindgren is very simply the team's win-loss record when he is in the lineup versus when he is not in the lineup. Coming into this season, the Ranger record since he's been here with Ryan Lindgren in the lineup, 199, 103, and 31. So if we combine all the losses together, it's still 199 wins versus 134 losses. Without Ryan Lindgren in the lineup in that same amount of time, a record of 51, 53, and 17. So again, if we combine the losses there, 51 wins, 70 losses. Every time I look up this stat, and I've done it multiple times because, throughout the entire offseason, Lindgren is a restricted free agent with arbitration rights. And how is this going to go? Is he still going to be with the Rangers? Long-term deal, short-term deal. And of course, they settle with the one-year deal at $4.5 million. But every time I look up this number, I'm blown away by it. It always ends up being even more extreme than I remember it being for whatever reason or another. And again, this is coming from somebody that's a Ryan Lindgren fan. And the thing that I must throw out there that's very important to note here, we are not talking about a small sample size when it comes to this number here. When it comes to the Ranger record with Ryan Lindgren in the lineup versus the Ranger record with Ryan Lindgren out of the lineup, we are talking about 454 games. Basically, how many seasons worth of hockey is that? That's like 5 seasons worth of hockey, give or take. I haven't done the math there, but it's somewhere in that ballpark. And I think that, if there is a case to be made to keep Ryan Lindgren around, that's what you look at first. Because, and I genuinely am asking this question. I'm not being like snarky or sarcastic about it because, I know that there's some people that want to see the Rangers move on from Ryan Lindgren. I've been kind of a Lindgren loyalist. I know that. I accept that. But can anybody look at that number and give me a reason why, a tangible reason why it's like that, other than the fact that Ryan Lindgren is very clearly positively impacting this Ranger team? Again, if we're talking about like 10 games, 25 games, 50 games, even 100 games, I can look at it and say, yeah, you're probably right. There's probably a little bit of a random factor there. But when you're talking about 454 games, I just can't accept that as like random, just kind of, stats just happen sometimes. I'm not buying it with a sample size as big as that. So again, I challenge anybody that wants to push Ryan Lindgren out the door to explain that stat to me, because that's, to me, the biggest case you can make for why Ryan Lindgren should be extended. The other reason, this kind of goes hand in hand with what we were just talking about here, but another big reason why you can make a case to extend Ryan Lindgren is that he's a heart and soul guy. This stuff is very difficult to measure. He's one of those glue guys, one of those guys that goes out there, leaves it all on the ice every single night. He's got the respect of his teammates and everybody in the locker room. And, I also realize that there's got to be something a little bit more tangible than just like, oh, his teammates like him. Like, you have to have a better reason than that to extend Ryan Lindgren for 4 years, 5 years, 6 years at like, $4 million a season, $5 million, whatever it ends up being. I get that, but there is something to be said for somebody that goes out there, plays the brand of hockey that he plays with that grip, plays with that snarl, and is willing to sacrifice his body and do whatever it takes to help his team win a hockey game. The other thing that's kind of in Lindgren's favor is the rapport that he has with Adam Fox. Fox, as we all know, has basically been one of the elite NHL defensemen pretty much ever since he made his Ranger debut. And through just about all of that time, we've seen Adam Fox with Ryan Lindgren. I mean, there's been some exceptions, obviously, to start this season. We've seen a lot of Fox with K'Andre Miller, and Lindgren has been with just about everybody, it seems like, to start the season, despite the fact that he missed some games at the start of the year. But, I'll admit this as a Lindgren fan. I will say that Adam Fox, it's not like he's going to be hopelessly lost if Ryan Lindgren is no longer on this team and Fox has to be out there with somebody like K'Andre Miller or Zach Jones or whoever it ends up being in a future season. I think Adam Fox can figure it out on his own, but I would also argue that that's not nothing, the rapport that Ryan Lindgren does have with Adam Fox. And another reason why you could make a case to extending Ryan Lindgren is the uncertain future of the New York Ranger blue line. Only Adam Fox is signed for more than the next 2 years. Now, some of these guys will be back. Some of them are RFAs. Some of them are RFAs with arbitration rights, and you figure they'll get something done. So, there are guys that will be back, more than the next 2 seasons. But with all that said, you look at K'Andre Miller, there's certain Ranger fans that are talking about the idea of possibly trading him. He's an RFA with arbitration rights. I would lean more toward re-signing Miller and possibly than letting Ryan Lindgren walk if it comes down to keeping one of those guys or the other. But Miller, bottom line, uncertain future, RFA with arbitration rights. Jacob Trouba, I think this is very likely his final season as a member of the Rangers. You never know what can happen. And if the Rangers win the Stanley Cup, certainly that can change. But the writing seems to be on the wall right now as it pertains to Jacob Trouba and his future with this team. I just don't think they can afford him after this season. And even if they do bring him back, he's only got 1 more year left on his contract anyway. You look at somebody like Zach Jones. He, at the end of the season, is an RFA with arbitration rights. It seems like his name always comes up in trade talks, and there's no guarantee that he's going to be here for the long haul either. And even when you look at, say, like the Hartford Wolfpack, there's not really a ton of guys that you feel like are going to get called up and make a big-time impact. Now, Victor Mancini was one of them, and obviously it's off to a pretty good start with Mancini thus far. But you look at the other Wolfpack defensemen, it's basically a bunch of journeyman veterans, and then like Matthew Robertson, who I don't even know what to say about him anymore because there's so few updates on like how he's doing or how the Rangers feel about him that it kind of feels like he's faded into the background and no longer really seems to be a big part of the Ranger future. And on top of that, he too is an RFA with arbitration rights when the season ends. So you can't really count on him. Now, there are some more recent draft picks that I think the Rangers do feel good about. Drew Fortescue and EJ Emery certainly come to mind. 3rd-round pick and a 1st-round pick respectively, but they're not ready yet. They're not going to be on the Rangers as soon as next season. So, with all that, all the uncertainty there, you can make a case that, Ryan Lindgren, though he's not perfect, though he is a little bit injury prone, and though there are defensemen with higher upsides than Lindgren, he is a known commodity, and he is somebody that obviously, has had a fair amount of success here as a member of the Rangers. So if you make that case, you can then go with the idea of possibly extending Ryan Lindgren. I still feel like it's the least likely outcome pretty much of everything. I'm not completely ruling it out. I'm not completely closing the door on a reunion between Rangers and Ryan Lindgren. Never say never. But right now, yeah, it just doesn't feel like it's going to happen. That's just kind of my gut feel. You guys definitely let me know what you think. But in just a second, we're going to shift our attention to another option. We're going to look at the possibility of the New York Rangers trading Ryan Lindgren before the deadline this season, and we will do that in just a second. All right, we just want to take a minute to let everybody know that today's episode of Locked On New York Rangers is brought to you by PrizePicks. PrizePicks is the best place to get real money sports action with over 10 million members and billions of dollars in awarded winnings. PrizePicks has made daily fantasy sports accessible to all. You just pick more or less on at least 2 players for a shot to win up to 100 times your cash. Run your game all season long on PrizePicks. You can now win up to 100 times your money on PrizePicks with as little as 4 correct picks. PrizePicks is the best way to get action on sports in over 30 states, including California, Florida, Georgia, and Texas. Sign up today and get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It is guaranteed. Download the app today and use code LOCKEDONNHL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Once again, download the app today and use code LOCKEDONNHL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. All right, let's go ahead and keep everything rolling here on Locked On New York Rangers. Huge shout out to the everydayers as always, and thank you guys for tuning in every single day, listening, watching, doing whatever you got to do. In our next episode, I'm thinking we're probably going to take a look at that episode of Game 7 on Amazon Prime. There's 5 episodes right now. It's kind of like a little mini-series. I'm hoping they'll eventually do more episodes, but it's just what it sounds like. It takes a look at a historic Game 7 across, baseball, hockey, or football, and they did one on the 1994 Stanley Cup final between the Rangers and the Canucks. Obviously, that has a very happy ending for us, and I loved it. I watched it about a week ago, but looking forward to discussing it on a future episode, likely in tomorrow's episode. But for right now, let's go ahead and continue talking about Ryan Lindgren, and more specifically, all the options that the Rangers have when it comes to Ryan Lindgren moving forward here. So we covered the possibility of extending him. Now we talk about the possibility of trading Ryan Lindgren. And first things first here, I'm not going to trade Ryan Lindgren just to do it. If I'm Chris Drury, I'm not going to do this out of boredom. I'm not going to do this just kind of like as a random move or, this idea that this team is somehow better with Ryan Lindgren out of the lineup. This isn't a video game where we're just bored, so let's trade somebody. It has to make some sense, and it has to be leading to the Rangers doing something else. I'm not really interested in trading Ryan Lindgren for a draft pick because the Rangers right now are trying to win the Stanley Cup. Draft picks are all well and good, but you never know how it's going to go. Is this player going to work out or not? That the guy that we trade for, that's always up for debate, and there are certainly no guarantees. But right now, again, not really all that interested in a draft pick. If you trade Ryan Lindgren for like a second-round draft pick, how many years is it going to be before that dude's even in the NHL? And we're trying to attack this window right now and win at least one Stanley Cup before it closes. So with that in mind, again, I'm not going to do it just to do it. On top of that, there's also going to be some people this will inevitably happen in the comment section, and if not here, certainly on social media of some kind, who will say, well, you can't let him walk and get nothing for him. And I completely disagree with that. That is a sacrifice that needs to be made when you are in a Stanley Cup window. When you're trying to win a Stanley Cup, and the Rangers are 8-2-1 to start the season, this is 1 year after they won the President's Trophy, 1 year after they were 2 wins away from making it to the Stanley Cup final. You can't worry about that. It'd be one thing if the Rangers were this, bottom of the basement team, a cellar dweller, one of the worst 5 teams in hockey, and they were looking to rebuild and stock up for the future. Then by all means, yes, trade Ryan Lindgren, get yourself a draft pick or, a prospect of some kind, whatever you can get in exchange for Ryan Lindgren. But that's not the case. The case is the Rangers, once again, are Stanley Cup contenders, a team that's off to a, mostly good start this season. There's things you can nitpick, but the record, I think, speaks for itself. And with all that being the case, you need to hold on to Ryan Lindgren because trading him away for a draft pick, you've just weakened your team, a team that has designs on winning the Stanley Cup this year. And that's something that you just can't do. The only way that I'm going to trade Ryan Lindgren is, if I'm Chris Drury, the only way I'm doing this is if by trading him, you now open up the door at the trade deadline to do something big, something major. Because if you trade Ryan Lindgren, say for a draft pick, and you get back the second round pick, the third round pick, whatever it is, you now have opened up $4.5 million worth of cap space because that's what Ryan Lindgren is making this season. And at that point, you might be able to bring in a superstar player at the trade deadline that you weren't going to be able to do or to bring in before that. That newly created cap space could make a big time difference for this Ranger team because, again, trading him does free up $4.5 million. But right now, the Rangers, you look at the trade deadline, they're projected to have $5.5 million in cap space. I think they can make a couple of moves with that cap space. They don't need to open up more cap space by trading away Ryan Lindgren, somebody that, again, has been very important to this team. And you should be able to improve your team at the deadline without moving Lindgren. The only way, though, if there's a superstar player with a big cap hit, and by trading Lindgren, you can now bring this guy in, now you've got something to think about. In that kind of a scenario, I would certainly at least consider it. In that kind of a scenario, you might not have a choice but to trade Ryan Lindgren. Another reason why I think there's people looking at, the possibility and maybe even favoring the possibility of Ryan Lindgren being traded is because on paper, it does feel like the Rangers might be able to get by without him. Maybe. And that's the big word here, maybe. Because I think for a lot of people, they look at somebody like Zach Jones and they say, well, he's never really gotten a chance. He's flashed some upside. He's flashed some potential. And this is somebody that deserves to be in the NHL. And then you also look at somebody like Victor Mancini, who really kind of exploded onto the scene during the preseason and obviously fought his way onto the team. And you kind of just look at it and say, well, we can get by without Ryan Lindgren because we can just plug in Victor Mancini and Zach Jones into the lineup. And yes, you could do that. But I don't like that idea for a couple of different reasons. For starters, if you do that, you're banking on 6 defensemen staying healthy for the entire Stanley Cup playoffs. And if that doesn't happen, you're going to have a serious problem. Imagine a scenario where the Rangers trade Ryan Lindgren away before the trade deadline. And okay, we got other guys in place. We'll just roll with the 6 guys that are left, and we'll be just fine. Now, say the playoffs start, and you have an injury to one of your more significant defensemen. Let's just say K'Andre Miller. And obviously, I'm not wishing injury on anybody. I'm just looking at a hypothetical situation here and acknowledging the very real truth that it's very difficult to get through the entire Stanley Cup playoffs with the same 6 defensemen night in and night out. So now you've traded away Ryan Lindgren. You've also got K'Andre Miller down with an injury. Now you're 6 defensemen for a playoff game against a team like, I don't know, the Capitals, the Hurricanes, possibly a rematch with the Panthers. The Bruins are kind of a mess right now. I get the feeling they'll eventually pick it up. But whoever you're playing, you're now going into a playoff series or having to continue a playoff series against one of those teams with the following 6 defensemen. You'd be down to Fox, Schneider, Trouba, Jones, Mancini, and probably Ruedel. That's a little shaky. And I just don't like the idea of trading away, a player that has meant so much to this team and that adds a lot of depth. If you trade away Ryan Lindgren, you're losing a lot there as far as depth is concerned, and I just don't like that idea. You could really, it's a really big roll of the dice. First of all, that everybody would stay healthy, and then secondly, that somebody like Zach Jones would excel in the playoffs. He's only played 75 career NHL games and none in the playoffs. And Victor Mancini, look, I love Mancini. I love what I've seen so far. He's mostly done good, a couple rookie hiccups every now and then, but overall, I think he's played well. But dude, you're talking now about a 22-year-old with 9 games of NHL experience. And I realize it'll be more than that by the time we get to the playoffs. But even still, very limited experience in the NHL for Mancini. And again, no playoff games, 22 years old. That's a heck of a leap of faith to trade Ryan Lindgren and just assume that everything will go completely fine with Jones and with Mancini. And on top of that, how many times have we heard people say, we need more toughness, we need more grit, we need more snarl? Well, Ryan Lindgren brings that, and that's one thing that, even if you're not the biggest Ryan Lindgren fan, I think you could at least appreciate that and appreciate that that's what you need in the playoffs. That's what people have been hammering into my head ever since this show has existed. Got to be tougher, got to be meaner, got to be nastier, all this stuff. Well, Ryan Lindgren at least gives you some of that. And if you take him away, you're not going to get nearly as much from, say, somebody like Zach Jones in that department that you're going to get from Ryan Lindgren. So trading Ryan Lindgren, I wouldn't completely rule it out. I mean, if it's part of a bigger deal, a bigger move, mini roster rebuild, reshaking, whatever you want to call it at the trade deadline, then I can at least hear you out on, what the new team is going to look like after a Ryan Lindgren trade. But it's not something that I'd be rushing to do. I would prefer the Rangers simply let Ryan Lindgren play out his contract this season, not trade him, not extend him, just let the season go. He's still an important part of this team, and we'll see how the chips fall at the end of the year once he is eligible to become a free agent. And in fact, that's what we're going to close out today's episode talking about, that very scenario, the idea of Ryan Lindgren very simply just playing out the final year of his contract, and we will be doing that in just a second. All right, we just want to take a minute to let everybody know that today's episode of Locked On New York Rangers is brought to you by FanDuel. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That is FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. All right, so let's go ahead and close out today's episode with the most likely, most sensible option, and probably the one that I favor the most. I'd be curious to hear what you guys think. Do you want Ryan Lindgren to be extended, traded, or do you just simply let him play out the last year of his contract here and then cross that bridge when you get to it in the offseason? Definitely let me know about that. But I think this is the most likely scenario. And once again, the one that I favor the most, you just let him play out the final year of his deal, and then you see what happens in the offseason. Look, there was a reason why the Rangers eventually signed Ryan Lindgren for a high average annual value of $4.5 million, but only 1 year. It's because this team does not want to make a long-term commitment to Ryan Lindgren. The $4.5 million seemed high, at least for me, for Ryan Lindgren. But I think that's the way that you get him to sign the contract because, he was a restricted free agent with arbitration rights. Of all the RFAs, it always felt like his was the one that could extend the longest, and he was the last Ranger RFA to sign this last preseason here. But they found a way to get it done. They probably gave him a little bit more than they wanted to, but they gave him only the 1 year, which I think is what the Rangers probably preferred all along. I get the feeling Lindgren was probably looking for more of a length commitment, but then when it gets to the point where he's getting $4.5 million, maybe he's willing to sign the deal. That sounds very likely as far as how it all went down and how he signed that 1 year contract extension. And look, the Rangers' hesitancy to sign him to a long-term extension, it's understandable when you look at his injury history, which at times I think is still at least a little bit exaggerated, but in fairness, the injuries have piled up. I mean, there's people that make it sound like this dude goes out there and plays like 30 games a year. It's nothing like that, but it does seem like he misses at least a decent chunk of every season, with one kind of an injury or another. So you can understand the Rangers being hesitant given the injury history that he has. And on top of that, injuries aside, I mean, you just look at the style of game that he plays. It feels like he's one of those defensemen that may not age as well as some other defensemen. I know there's a lot of comparisons being made between Ryan Lindgren and Dan Girardi. The one counterpoint that I would throw back is that, and I've mentioned this before, Ryan Lindgren is significantly younger now at 26 than he was when Girardi signed his contract extension when he was like 32 and has a 6-year contract extension. So it is quite a bit different when you look at their respective ages, but still I can see some similarities there as well. I think another reason why the Rangers don't want to go to a long-term deal with Ryan Lindgren is because there is a relative lack of upside when it comes to Ryan Lindgren. Ryan Lindgren's one of those players where what you see is what you get. He was almost a finished product almost as soon as he debuted, which sounds kind of strange to say that. But when you look at his game, he's solid, he's reliable, he's dependable, but there's nothing that screams like this guy is going to be a superstar player. I've never really seen it with Ryan Lindgren. And again, this is coming from somebody who is a big fan of Lindgren, but I've never looked at him as like a superstar in the making or somebody with all this untapped upside where he's going to be, just this phenomenal defenseman. Honestly, as soon as he was like 23 years old, I started thinking like, yeah, this is pretty much who Ryan Lindgren is going to be throughout his entire career. And what he is, again, is a very rock-solid, dependable defenseman, but not much more than that. There's not a lot of offense when it comes to Ryan Lindgren. You can't really look at him as any kind of a puck-moving defenseman. I think his puck skills are somewhat underrated, but it's certainly nothing to write home about. And he is on the smaller side of NHL defenseman. He is 6 feet tall, 200 pounds. That's not a small human being by any stretch of the imagination, but when you look at him up against some of the other NHL defensemen, he is a little bit on the smaller side, and there is that physicality and that snarl, but should physicality and snarl, and again, just being like a solid defenseman, should that really cost you, $4.5 million a season, $5 million a season for 5 or 6 years? Probably not, if we're being completely honest. And some of you have pointed this out as well, there's nothing about Lindgren's game where you look at it and say he is completely irreplaceable. The one thing that I always go back to, though, and I mentioned it earlier in today's episode, is that wild disparity in the Ranger record when he's in the lineup versus when he is not in the lineup. That's absolutely wild. And again, I can't figure that one out, even as a Ryan Lindgren fan, how there's that much of a difference in such a high amount of games played. Again, we're not talking about a small sample size at all there, but the biggest reason why I think this is what the Rangers should do, just let him play out the last year of his contract, and why I think it's what they will do, it's very simple, and it's something that we've touched on here and there throughout really this entire episode. And honestly, just about any time we talk about Ryan Lindgren in any kind of detail, is that the Rangers still need him. I don't see a way where you trade Ryan Lindgren and become a better team. You can do it and you can roll the dice, as I mentioned earlier, with somebody like Mancini and somebody like Jones and having the two of them in the lineup night in and night out. But man, you are trading a proven, known commodity for, a draft pick. I think making the team not as good as it is now if you trade Ryan Lindgren, and you are taking just an enormous leap of faith in both Mancini and Jones, who both have yet to play, their first Stanley Cup playoff games. So for me, I got to keep him. He's just too important to this team. Trading him hurts your chances of winning a Stanley Cup this year. I also don't think they should be extending him for all the reasons that I mentioned earlier. Again, I won't close the door on that, but it seems less likely than 50% that they'll end up extending Ryan Lindgren. We'll see how it goes. The one thing I'll also throw out there, because I've mentioned this whenever it comes to Jacob Trouba as well, and I'll mention it here with Ryan Lindgren. Ryan Lindgren, if he's not traded and if he's not extended before the deadline, and they just let him play out the final year of his deal here, and they go on to win the Stanley Cup, and he's out there and he's a part of it, and he's playing significant minutes, maintaining his role on the top pairing with Adam Fox, or maybe he's on the second pairing or even the third pairing with any of the other Ranger defensemen. If he's a part of this team winning a Stanley Cup, I think just like Trouba, that increases his chances of being back this upcoming season. I think at a certain point, you can't overdo it in this regard, but man, the Rangers Stanley Cups, they're so few and far between and they're so rare that I think there will be a loyalty factor to anybody that makes that a reality. Like if they win the Stanley Cup this year, I think that gets Jacob Trouba back for the final year of his contract. And it could even result in Ryan Lindgren signing some kind of an extension with the New York Rangers. Maybe they would again try to go for a shorter deal at a higher average annual value. That presents its own challenges, though, because now you're eating into the salary cap for next year, an offseason where you've got to re-sign, Igor Shesterkin still. Obviously, Alexi Lafreniere has his new deal. Keandre Miller's contract is up. Capo Caco's contract is up. There's a couple of other guys as well. So it won't be easy no matter what. But I say you just keep him for the rest of the season. You see how everything goes. You see how the chips fall. You see if he can stay healthy. And then hopefully you win the Stanley Cup. And then you make that determination on, whether you want to try to keep him around after the season ends. I think if nothing else, Chris Drury and the Rangers, when the season concludes, however it concludes, they at least should sit down with Ryan Lindgren and see if they can hash something out. But I just don't know how likely it is that it'll happen. So I think my prediction, as well as my preference, is that they simply let him play out this final year of his contract. But we'll see how it goes. There's could be a lot of twists and turns left in this road as far as Ryan Lindgren and his tenure on the New York Rangers. But we'll see how it all happens. And you guys definitely let me know your thoughts on this matter and how you think the Rangers should proceed with Ryan Lindgren. But I figure we can call it there for today. Once again, if you would like to get in touch with this podcast, please send an email to lockedonnyrangers@gmail.com. Once again, that is lockedonnyrangers@gmail.com. Definitely give us a follow on Twitter as well at LO_NY_Rangers. Once again, that's at LO_NY_Rangers. And definitely subscribe to Locked On New York Rangers YouTube channel. Thanks again, guys. I will see you next time.